Okay, today's daf is Masechet Sheqalim Daf Daled. We're going to start on the bottom of Gimel Amud Bet with the new Mishnah, or as it's called in the Yerushalmi, Halacha Daled. The Mishnah says, Afal pi she'amru en memashkinin nashim v'avadim uktanim. Even though it says we do not compel, we don't confiscate the property of women or slaves or children to force them to give them a chatzita shekel, as we learned yesterday. Im shakalu mekabelin miyadan. If they do give them a chatzita shekel, we receive it from them. In other words, we don't force them. It's not compulsory, but we receive it, we accept it. However, hanochriva kuti sheshakilu. If a non-Jew or a kuti is a Samaritan, these people who, when the Jews were thrown out of Israel the first time, the Babylonians relocated into Israel these people called the Kutim, people from Kuta. And they accepted Jewish practices. And there was a whole debate as to whether they had the status of Jews or not throughout history. In the end, they were excluded from the Jewish people. But there was a time where there was a debate on their status, the status of their conversion. So anyway, so this is obviously presuming that they're not Jewish. It says the non-Jew or the kuti who give the machatzita shekel, we don't accept it from them. They're not supposed to participate in machatzita shekel. It has to belong to the Jewish people. Ve'en mekabelim miyadam kinei zavin v'kinei zavot v'kinei yoledot v'hataot v'shamot. And we don't receive from non-Jews or from kutim the kinei zavin. These are the birds the bird offerings that a zav, when he becomes purified, would bring, or that a zavot would bring, or that a woman who gave birth would bring, or chataot, sin offerings, ashamot, guilt offerings. Why not? Because these are all things that only a Jew brings. These are only a mitzvah for a Jew to bring. Why is a non-Jew bringing them? So we're not going to receive them from them. This is the rule. Kol shen nidar v'nidav, anything which can be voluntarily contributed. You can make a voluntary offering. So then mekabelin miyadan. Kol she'eno nidav v'nidav, and mekabelin miyadan. Anything that can't be voluntarily contributed can't be taken from the non-Jews. In other words, if it's something that only has existence, that's only valid when there's an obligation. I can't say I want to bring a korban chatat because I feel guilty today. That's not a good reason. It has to be a halachic obligation. So since a non-Jew can't have a halachic obligation to bring a korban chatat, there's never such a thing. So he can't bring it. However, what he can do is bring a voluntary offering. He can say, this is a korban olah, I want to offer it. And there's no problem. And this is what Ezra says in the book of Ezra. Because when they were going to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash, second Beit HaMikdash, and we know that the Shomronim, what we call the Kutim, wanted to join together with Ezra to rebuild because they were living in the land. The Kutim that we mentioned before, they had been living there. They said, hey, we're Jewish too.
Wait, the Shomronim were
They're the same people, the Kutim.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
These are the same people. Mm-hmm. So the Kutim, they call them the Shomronim because they live in Shomron, but basically they're the same people. Yeah. So that's a descendant of, they have a whole other narrative. They're like, no, we're the real Jews. Yeah.
But they had different practices, though.
They were at the time of the Talmud. They were very similar. They were basically following Jewish law. So the question was, did they have a valid conversion or not? That was the whole debate. So in the times of Ezra, they wanted to join together, and they said to them, "No, it's not for you and for us to build this house. Lo lachem velanu livnot bayit beloheinu." Meaning, you can't join us. And then the Kutim went and they informed on the Jews, and they caused them all kinds of political trouble because the Jews didn't want to let them participate. And we turn to Dalet Amud Aleph. Now we get to something called the Kalbon. The Kalbon was something which was an extra surcharge, basically, that you brought with your machatzita shekel. If a person brought, let's say, a selah. Okay, a machatzita shekel is half of a selah. A person brought a selah and said, I'd like to give for two people machatzita shekel. Me and another guy. We're going to join together. We're going to give one coin. So because he's not giving machatzita shekel actually, right? He's not giving an actual machatzita shekel. It has to be broken into two machatziot shekel. It's by itself, it's too much. So he has to pay what's called the kalbon, the surcharge, to break the money. Okay? As the Korban Ha'edah says here, he says it's davar kal. That's why it's called the kalbon. It's davar kal mu'at shemosifim amachatzita shekel. וכשרוצים לקחת מן השולחני בין חצאי שקלים ועד שקל שלם. In other words, if he brings a full shekel, it's a small extra surcharge that the person brings.
Because he's not bringing the right
Because he's not bringing exact change. Remember they used to have on the bus? I mean, they probably still do, right? Exact change only. Right? So it's exact change only. If you don't have exact change, you don't have a machatzit shekel, either because you bring smaller coins, you bring pennies and you say, I want it to be machatzit shekel, or because you had too much and you need to break it.
The concept is like the 7-Eleven where you have like the box of pennies.
Right.
Yeah, right. And they enter extra, right? They have that a lot.
You just take a penny and you add it, right? That's the
So that's why
color.
we make such a fuss over the actual coins here.
The actual machatzit shekel, right? So if you bring, in other words, if you bring a complete shekel instead of machatzit shekel, or you bring less than a machatzit shekel, smaller denominations of coin, and you want to combine it to machatzit shekel, in either case you have to do kalbon, because there's a surcharge that you would normally pay to the shulchani, to the money changer. So even though you're not going through a money changer, you have to pay the extra surcharge. But who has to do this? Levi'im, Yisraelim, Vegerim, Ba'avadim, Mishucharim. Levi'im, Yisraelim, converts, slaves that are freed. But not Kohanim, women, slaves or children. Why? Because in all these cases, except for Kohanim, they're not obligated actually to bring machatzit shekel. They're doing it out of the kindness of their heart. The women, the slaves, the children, they don't have to bring machatzit shekel. So we don't charge them a surcharge if they bring more. Kohanim, the reason is because they didn't want to cause... It was already a controversial issue whether the Kohanim had to bring machatzit shekel, like we learned yesterday. So they didn't want to add onto it an additional obligation of bringing the kalbon, because they were going to, add flame to the... gasoline to the fire that was already raging. So... השוקל על ידי כהן, על ידי אישה, על ידי עבד, על ידי קטן, פטור. Similarly, if you bring machatzit shekel on behalf of a kohen, on behalf of a woman, on behalf of a slave, on behalf of a katan, patur, you're exempt from the kalbon as well. So he says, if you read the Korban Haida says, "Kegon shilva lehem, dekevan de pturin hen, lo mechayve bekalbon." Since what you're doing is you're lending them the money. In other words, they're going to pay you back later. You're doing it for them. You're fronting the money for them. Let's say for a woman and her child. So you gave a complete shekel. So you have to bring the kalban because they're going to have to break the shekel into 2 chatzei shekel. So therefore you're exempt. If you bring 1 shekel and you say, this is for me and my friend Bob. 2 machatziyot shekel, right? 2 chatzei shekel. So you bring 1 shekel, a complete shekel. The value obviously is 2 machatzit shekel. You say, for me and for Abraham, we're bringing 1.
It's the wrong coin.
It's a wrong coin, but we're partnering in this, and so you have to bring kalbon echad, 1 surcharge fee for that. However, Rabbi Meir Omer bet kolbonot. According to Rabbi Meir, it's 2 kalbonot. Why? Because Rabbi Meir holds that the kalbon is a requirement even if you don't break any money. In other words, even if you give a machatzit shekel, normally you have to give the kolban also, according to Rabbi Meir. Everybody has to do it, according to Rabbi Meir.
Yeah, but then that goes against because it seems like the entire point is that you have to give exactly half a shekel.
That's what it seems like according to everybody except for Rabbi Meir.
Except for Rabbi Meir.
Exactly. That is what it is, except for him.
Exactly
right. He holds that there's a different problem. He holds that the problem is that our machatzit shekel can't be exactly sure that it's exactly the right amount.
Right.
So the Torah requires a person to give a little bit extra, just to be sure. What? Right, the Torah requires you to do it. So each person has to give a little bit more.
The problem is if you cannot give more.
Right, well...
Right, because that solves the problem of, okay, you've covered half a shekel and you didn't go under.
Right.
But if the requirement is no more and no less...
Yeah, but everyone's giving the same, so it's still okay. Everyone's still giving the same. Nobody's exceeding the number. Everyone gives the same. So in this case, according to Rabbi Meir, the problem is that you have 2 people involved. And if that shekel that you gave is actually 99.99999% of a shekel,
right,
then you only gave, let's say, 49.99999% of a shekel, and the other guy only gave 49.99999%. Nobody gave a 50%.
Yeah.
So each one has to give the kolbon according to Rabbi Meir. That's because that's his concern. The Chachamim are not concerned with that. They say, no, half a shekel is fine. The only thing is, if you're going to ask us to break the money for you, you have to pay the extra surcharge, because there's a value to the breaking of money. Okay, there's a value to that as well you have to cover. Then he says, Hanoten sela venotel shekel. What if a person doesn't give one sela? He doesn't give 1 shekel. In other words, he doesn't give the money and say, I want to break the money and I'm giving it all to the Beit HaMikdash. But he wants change. Right, so he gives a sela and he says, I want a shekel back. So what happens if you give a sela and you want a shekel back? So what happens is that they're going to take the you gave 1 sela to the guy behind the counter, right? And you say to the guy, I want to take back it really is a machatzita shekel, not a shekel, but the point is that you're not giving both of the chatza'eh shekel to the guy. Okay, really it should say you took back a machatzita shekel. It's not being exact. Okay, because a sela is the same as a shekel. So you gave a shekel, you gave a sela to the guy behind the counter. But instead of saying, this is for me and Matthias, and we want to combine, and I don't want any change, you said, I want change. I want to break it. Like when if you hand Rafi in the morning $5, he gives you change. Right? $4 back. So same thing. You want your change back. So if you want your change back, so then Chayav shnei kolbonot. Then you have to give 2 kolbonot. We're going to see if that's only according to Rabbi Meir or according to everybody.
That's the surcharge.
Okay? The surcharge. Because the question is that because they had to break the money already for the Beit HaMikdash and you're getting the money back? Right? Or is it because you have to give the little extra plus that they broke the money? So there's 2 things. Okay, so because according to Rabbi Meir, you always have to give 2 kolbonot. Why? Because if you break, you have to give. In other words, the money. Every person has to give a kolbon automatically, even if they give a regular machatzit shekel. And if you give a sela and they have to break the money, you have to give 2. Okay, that's because Rabbi Meir agrees with that idea too. He's adding something. He's not disagreeing with the Chachamim. He's adding something. He's saying not only do you have to pay a kolbon for each person, you also have to cover the surcharge.
Handling charges.
Right, handling charges, right. And we're going to see, so then how does that work with the 2 people? Why don't the 2 people have to give 3? We're going to see, the Gemara is going to say that he does hold that they have to give 3. Okay, well, we'll see. We'll see the Gemara a little bit more. So then we move on. So, Hashokel al yad ani ve'al yad shecheno ve'al yad ben iro patur. If a person gives the machatzita shekel out of the kindness of his heart on behalf of somebody else, in other words, he gives a selah, and he says, this is for me and a poor guy. This is for me and my neighbor. I'm not going to ask my neighbor to pay. I'm just going to give it for him. I'm not lending it to him. I'm actually covering it for him. I'm being a nice guy. So then we say, what a nice guy that is. Patur. We're not going to make him pay the surcharge because he's such a nice guy. However, if Ve'im hilvan chayav. But if he lent the money, in other words, he said to his friend, listen, I'll front you the money, pay me later, then he has to pay the kolban because he's giving them 1 shekel. They're going to have to break the shekel in the Beit HaMikdash. That's a surcharge. And he's not doing a kindness for his friend. You're just lending it to him. He's going to get the money back. האחים השותפים שחייבים בקלבון פטורים ממעשר בהמה וכשחייבים ממעשר בהמה פטורים מן הקלבון. He says when brothers who are partners, as we're going to see what this case is, in a case where partners are obligated in the kolbon, they're exempt from maaser of their animals. And when they're obligated in maaser of their animals, they're exempt from the kolbon. The reason that's going to be given, we're going to see, is because of this idea of the estate of the brothers. In other words, their father died and left them an inheritance. As long as that inheritance is still intact and they're just taking care of the inheritance, it's considered to still belong to the father, even though the father died. So what does that mean? If they, on one hand, for the animals, it means that there's only one owner of the animals, and therefore they're obligated in maaser. Every 10th animal has to be given as maaser. On the other hand, it's considered to be one owner, the father. So when they give machatzita shekel, if they give, let's say, 1 coin on behalf of the 2 of them, it's like their father is paying for them. And we know that when you're paid for somebody else, you don't have to pay the kolban.
Yeah.
So therefore, since they're paying out of their father's money, their father is paying for them, so to speak, he doesn't have to pay the kolban.
What's the reason?
But what about mustard?
For which thing?
That what you don't. Oh, sorry.
They weren't. I thought you said
If they don't divide the estate, it's still considered one thing.
Right, and then they're exempt from maser.
No, they have to pay maser because it's still owned by the father.
But they don't have to pay.
But they don't have to pay the kolbon because it's like he's paying for them, and if you pay for somebody else as a chesed, you don't have to pay for them.
That's just like
The kolbon. That's just a rule that they made. They didn't require you to do it. On the other hand, in a case where the brothers divided up the property, as we're going to see in the Gemara, when they divided up the property, each owns their own, even if they reconstituted a partnership. In other words, they divided up. They said, okay, you take this half, I'll take this half, but you know what, let's work together. Let's combine. So since they're partners, everyone decides to be partners, they reconstituted the partnership. So it's not the original, what's called tfusat habayit. It's not the original inheritance, the original estate anymore, because they already divided it and they recombined. Once they recombine, now the animals are owned by partners. Animals owned by partners are not subject to maser. Okay? But now each brother is obligated in the kolbon, because each one is considered to be paying from his own pocket now, not from the pocket of the father anymore. So that's why we're going to see the Gemara is going to explain this. Now the Gemara says, "Afal pi she'amru." Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped the last part of the Mishnah. Kamahu kolbon. How much is the kolbon? Ma'a kesef. Divrei Rabbi Meir. According to Rabbi Meir, it is a ma'a of money. A ma'a is approximately 1/24 of a shekel, which would be 1/12 of a machatzita shekel. Chachamim omrim chatzi ma'a. According to the rabbis, it's even 1/2 of that. Chatzi ma'a. So 1/48 of a shekel would be the amount.
You can't buy much for that.
Well, it's like we have a penny. Ma'ah. It's like a penny. A penny is 1/100th of a dollar. Somebody said that's not worth anything. Right. Somebody would say 1/100th of a dollar is not worth anything, but you'll find people in business arguing over half a penny. If you're dealing with bulk items, Right. I know that in my uncle's business, when they deal with bulk, gold and all that, you're ordering large quantities, so half a penny is worth something.
Exactly.
Now, it adds up. The Gemara says, even though they said that we don't force the women and the slaves and the children to pay machatzit shekel, we accept it from them. So the Gemara says, halitba in tov'in. So the implication is, hachat amar tov'in. Right? We thought before that we're supposed to. He said, we're not supposed to ask them for it, right? At amar tov'in, v'acha at amar in tov'in. Right? Before it sounded like, are you saying that you're supposed to ask for them? Because in the previous Mishnah you said, en mimashkinin, we don't confiscate the property. Right? Implication is, we ask them to pay the machatzit shekel, we don't force them if they say no. Here you're saying that we don't even ask them. It's just mikabelin miyadan. We accept it from them. We don't even push them to do it. So which is it? Because remember, for children before we said, for the child, we don't force him to pay, but we ask him to pay. That's what you said in the previous Mishnah. We ask them to pay. We don't force them. Here it says we don't even ask them. We just accept it if they give it. Okay, so the answer is, kan b'shehevi bet zarot, v'kan b'shelo bet zarot. It depends. If the child is bar mitzvah age, okay, so under bar mitzvah, we don't ask anything. We don't even ask him. If he gives it, we take it. Up to bar mitzvah age, we ask him to give it. If he refuses, we don't bother him. Once he reaches the age of 20, we said yesterday, then we even force him. It's compulsory. You must give machatzit shekel. So we said about the non-Jew, we don't accept machatzit shekel from the non-Jew. Amar Rabbi Ba says, Tiftar keman damar kuti kenochri. So it must be that this Mishnah is following the belief that a kuti is a non-Jew. Because it says a kuti, we don't accept machatzit shekel from him. Ki de at palagin kuti kenochri divrei Rabbi Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer kuti ki Yisrael lechol davar. Because we know that there's a machloket. The palagin means they have a machloket. According to Rabbi, which is Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the kuti kenochri, the kuti, the Samaritan or the Shomroni is like a non-Jew. According to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, he's like a Jew. So this Mishnah is clearly following the view that he's like a non-Jew, because it's saying that the Nochri and a Kuti, we don't receive the Machatzit shekel from them. Amar Rabbi Lazar said, Matnitin benochrim ha bekutim lo. It says, is our Mishnah is speaking about Nochrim, not about Kutim. Is that true? V'tanei V'taniken, but we learned the following: Adam lerabot tagirim, mikem lehotzi et hamumarim. Okay, we have a principle that Adam lerabot tagirim, that when it talks about bringing korbanot, that Adam, a person, right, any person can bring a korban, which includes gerim, it includes converts. Mikem, from you, lehotzi et hamumarim. That mikem means that we don't accept korbanot from unbelievers. Okay, mikem means it has to be a part of the Jewish people. It can't be somebody who is rejects Judaism. Okay, so this seems to support that we don't accept the kutim. Okay, that. I'm sorry, the other way around. That we should accept. Rabbi Elazar is saying, Matnitin benochrim habikutim lo. It's saying that we reject the non-Jewish machatzit shekel, but we do accept the kutim machatzit shekel, according to what Rabbi Elazar is saying. Matnitin pligel Rabbi Elazar en mekabalin miadam kinei zavin v'zavot kinei yoledot. So is our Mishnah disagreeing with Rabbi Elazar and saying that in fact we can accept from the hands of the kutim machatzit shekel? Right? It seems like there's a problem here, because our Mishnah said the kuti and the nochri we don't accept. Rabbi Elazar is saying no, we do accept. We don't accept from the non-Jew, but we do accept from the kuti. So is he disagreeing with our Mishnah? So let's take a closer look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah says we don't accept from the non-Jews kinim. We don't accept from them the bird offerings of a zav, of a zava. We don't accept from them any of these kinds of offerings. So wait a second. Do you think a non-Jew is going to bring you a korban if he has a child? The woman is going to come and bring a korban to become purified? Why would a non-Jewish woman do that?
It doesn't do anything for them.
Right? What does it do for them? Why would they do that? That would be bizarre. Rather, what does it mean? What it's saying is, Ela reisha benochrim v'seifa b'kutim. The end is talking about kutim. In other words, what it means is that non-Jews, they're not going to have any portion in these korbanot anyway. Kutim are the ones that you might think you would receive it from them. And therefore the Mishnah is telling you, no, we don't accept it from them. Right? It's saying that we don't accept it from them, even though they have a quasi-Jewish status. So the point is, yes, they are considered Jewish. They're not nochrim. They're not non-Jews. They're just banned from bringing korbanot, because they're considered to be non-believers, or not fully in the community of the Jews.
Infidels.
But infidels, heretics. But they are considered Jews insofar that they would want to bring one of these korbanot. Okay? We must say then that the beginning of the Mishnah that talked about machatzit shekel was talking about non-Jews. But the end of the Mishnah that talked about the offerings of the woman who gave birth, etc., is talking about kutim. It has to be that way. Because why would a non-Jew want to bring one of those offerings? Okay, so so in the end we conclude that actually our Mishnah is not saying that kutim are non-Jews. It's saying the opposite. It's saying that they are Jews. It's just that they're Jews that can't bring certain offerings because they're not believers. They're not part of the community of Israel, even though they might be halachically Jewish. But it's not saying that they're non-Jews, because if it were saying that they were non-Jews, then it wouldn't talk about these various sacrifices that a non-Jew would never think to bring. Okay, so this is a very interesting point. They're Jews, but they have a restriction on what they're willing to, on the level that they're allowed to participate. Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, "V'tchila in mekabelin mehen lo davar misuyam v'lo davar she'eino misuyam." When we're first building the Beit HaMikdash, we don't receive anything from the non-Jews. Not a davar misuyam, meaning not something which is distinct. Let's say that a non-Jew comes to the synagogue and says, "I want to put I want to put in a chandelier in the Beit Knesset." That's called davar misuyam. Everyone's going to look at that and say, the non-Jewish guy put that there. But we don't receive from them. Davar she'eino misuyam means that he gives cash. He donates money and we use it for whatever. So in the beginning, when they're first building, we don't receive anything. We don't receive a davar misuyam, we don't receive a davar she'eino misuyam, nothing. However, ubasof mekabelin mehen davar she'eino misuyam, ve'ein mekabelin mehen davar misuyam. But at the end, the rule is, meaning once the Beit HaMikdash is built and we're dealing with upkeep, we don't receive a davar misuyam. If the guy says, "Listen, I want to donate a new menorah, I want to donate a new this," we don't receive it. But if he wants to give cash, we'll take it. That's the rule according to Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Amar, ben batchila ben basof en mekabelin mehen lo davar misuyam v'lo davar she'eino misuyam. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, we never accept anything from them. We don't accept the davar misuyam. We don't accept the davar she'eino misuyam. Not a distinct thing, not an indistinct. Meaning not an object and not money. and not in the beginning, not in the end. We never receive it. Matnitin Pligal Rabbi Yochanan. It seems like our Mishnah is disagreeing with Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, why? En mekablin mehen hekdesh undava lebedek habayit. Because it says we don't receive from the non-Jews hekdesh undava lebedek habayit. We don't receive from them any kind of contributions for bedek habayit, for the upkeep of the Beit HaMikdash. That would imply that even after it's already built, we don't accept from them anything. Contrary to what Rabbi Yochanan said that we could accept cash from them once it's built. So patarla ben batchila ben basof. He would say, you know what? That's talking about any time, but ubilvad davar misuyam. But it's talking about a davar misuyam. In other words, they're not allowed. What it means when it says you can't receive anything for the upkeep is, let's say the menorah wears out or something like that. We need a new one, and the local Catholic says, I want to give. I'd like to contribute a new menorah to the Beit HaMikdash. Sorry, you can't. But if he wants to give money and we can use the money for whatever we want, that's okay. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish would say, but what about Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish? Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Resh Lakish, how is he going to explain this? He says they can never give anything. Right? So that for him, Ben Batchila Ben Basof and it fits perfectly with him. Because that he'll just say, that's talking about you can never accept anything for the Beit HaMikdash from them. Not in the beginning, not in the end, not distinct, not indistinct, nothing. Rabbi Yochanan will say, when it says you can't receive, it means you can't receive a davar misuyam. You can't receive something distinct.
The possibility that is that because if they can give money, can they give money for the entire whatever chandelier, and then have somebody else buy the chandelier? Because if they can give money,
you mean can they earmark the money?
Entire chandelier, and that would be really the chandelier that came from.
We're going to get to that. That's going to come up.
Okay.
Something similar to that's going to come up. So let's see. So he's asking, can he use subterfuge and basically give? He knows the chandelier is worth $2,000. He gives $2,000, and then they buy the chandelier. What's the difference, right? We'll see. Matnitin pligal Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. So our Mishnah seems to disagree with Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Detanya kol shavin she'noderin v'nidarin, because the Mishnah says that everybody agrees that a non-Jew can noderin, which means he can contribute. In other words, he can make a neder of a certain amount to the Beit HaMikdash. A pledge. He can make he can make a pledge to the Beit HaMikdash. And v'nidarin. And not only that, if a Jew says, I want to contribute the value of the non-Jew to the Beit HaMikdash, it was an honor to do that. You'd say, whatever his value is, I want to give it to the Beit HaMikdash. It was like a blessing to a person. So if you want, you could do that. It's no problem, but that shows you that the non-Jew nodrin, they can give. So patarla, he'll tell you olah. It's saying he can give a korban olah, meaning to say he can give something that's consumed, a consumable. He can give. He can't give a part of the Beit HaMikdash.
Something that's going to be shown.
That's going to be a part of it. He can give a korban, right? So ela kishamar Yisrael harei. But then the question is, nichan noderin olah. We understand that the non-Jew can say, I'm contributing a korban olah. I want to send it. But nidarin olah. What does it mean? Nidarin. We can make an oath on the non-Jew. We understand. In other words, before we were thinking of it in terms of money. He can pledge money to the Beit HaMikdash, or I can pledge that I'm going to give his value to the Beit HaMikdash. But now that we're saying that it means he can pledge a korban, I can't pledge him to be a korban. So what does it mean? I can pledge him. It means that if a Jew says, I take upon myself to bring a korban olah, the non-Jew can say, whatever that guy said, I'm going to bring it also. That's nidarin. In other words, he's piggybacking. He's becoming bound by your oath because he's accepting it upon himself. Now there's a whole long discussion in the Rishonim, some Achronim, actually mainly the Achronim deal with this problem. How could the non-Jew be bound by an oath? It's one of the 613 mitzvot that you have to fulfill an oath that you make, but it's not one of the 7 mitzvot of Bnei Noach. So how do they become obligated? It's a whole question.
It's Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. I think that says the Jew made an oath for the non-Jew.
And then the non-Jew says, no, I want to do what he says. The non-Jew accepts upon himself, I want to do it.
Right, no, but the Jew is obligated if you made it. Oh.
Right, but then the non-Jew piggybacks on it and says, whatever he said, I want to do. So why is he obligated in anything that he says? Because
it's like he made an oath, sort of.
Right. So in any case, the point is that what it's saying here is that according to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, the non-Jew cannot contribute anything to the Beit HaMikdash. That's part of the structure. All he can do is contribute consumables. He can contribute a korban. That's it. Rabbi Yochanan would say he can contribute funds to the Bedek HaBayit. That would be like our general fund of the synagogue. He can contribute to that, but he can't contribute a specific item. So now the Gemara says, Ve'eno mevi imo nesachim umotar nesachim lo leklei sharet inun. There's one problem. When he brings his korban olah, he also brings nisachim. Nisachim are the flour and the wine that come together with every korban that accompany the korban. Now the problem is that whatever's left over, in other words, they would take some of that and put it on the mizbeach, but whatever was left over was resold. Right? They would take, let's say, the wine that was left over from the libation, the flour that was left over from the offering, and they would resell it, and they would take that money, and that money would be to purchase new klei sharet, new vessels for serving in the Beit HaMikdash. So indirectly what's happening is that the non-Jew contributed the korban, including the libations and whatever. The extra libation that he contributed is now transformed into value by which klei sharet are purchased. Right, but so indirectly though, the non-Jew is contributing because he contributed a certain amount. He knew that, in other words, he knows that part of it is going to go to the mizbeach and part of it you're going to use eventually to buy
whatever.
Klei sharet. They would buy vessels with it.
But it's not like giving money.
Yes, that's the question. But according to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, she's not allowed to give money.
Oh, yeah.
So the korban olah, we understand it's completely burned, so there's no money, right? But what about the klei sharet that are going to be purchased with what the non-Jew contributed? So the answer is, so Hetiv Rabbi Yosei bar Rabbi Bon, Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Bon, responded, V'hatanina, we learned in a Mishnah, Ne'erachin ve'orachin, lo lebedek habayit inun, that Ne'erachin ve'orachin means he can contribute an erech. Erech means, he says, you say erech is that type of vow, that unique vow where the person says either his own erech or somebody else's, he will contribute to the Beit HaMikdash. And erech is either, it's determined purely based on gender and on age, right? The Torah gives certain gender and certain ages a certain amount of money that you give. So it says orachin v'ne'erachin. So he can be the subject of somebody else's erech vow. If somebody says, that non-Jew, I want to give his erech to the Beit HaMikdash, he's 20 years old and he's a male, so it's going to be such and such amount. Okay? On the other hand, he can also orachin. And what happens when the non-Jew contributes an erech vow? Where does it go? It goes to Bedek HaBayit Inun. Okay, so hechma da'at amar taman. What do you say over there? La shamayim hu mitkaven ume'alehen hen ba'in lebedek habayit. Ken at amar afacha la shamayim hu mitkaven ume'alehen hen ba'in lebedek habayit. So what do we say over there? What do we say with regard to the erech of the non-Jew when he gives the contribution to the Beit HaMikdash? How can he do it? He says that over there it's not considered something distinct. We put it into the general fund, okay, and it happens to trickle down into the Bedek HaBayit. It happens to end up that we use the money for the upkeep of the Beit HaMikdash. But when the non-Jew gave it, he just gave it as a contribution to honor God. He wasn't thinking, he didn't know what you're going to do with it. Maybe you're going to buy a korban with it. Maybe you're going to get a mani-pedi with it for the Kohen. He doesn't know what you're going to do with it, right? So since he doesn't know, what does he do? He's just giving money, la shamayim mitkaven. And we took it and we put it in the Bedek HaBayit. Okay, same thing. When he brings a korban, he's not thinking, I'm going to contribute something to the structure of the Beit HaMikdash. He's just giving money. Or he's giving a korban. And we took the leftovers of the korban, and what did we do with it? We contributed it, we took it, and we made it into Bedek HaBayit. We funneled it into the fund that supports the Bedek HaBayit. So since that wasn't, in other words, if the non-Jew comes and says, I want to give money for the upkeep of the Beit HaMikdash, or I want to give the money, according to Resh Lakish, he can't say that, and he can't say, I want to give a specific thing. According to Rabbi Yochanan, he just can't say, I want to give a specific thing.
I can see the problem with that, because this is something that is not, it's not something where it might or might not happen. It always happens.
It always happens.
Every time you give it, so it's almost the same.
But it wasn't his kavanah, is the point. Since it wasn't his kavanah to do that, he just wanted to give the erech, and he doesn't know what you're going to do with it.
You don't know what his kavanah. Maybe his kavanah was that. Maybe his kavanah was that. Okay, I'm going to indirectly give it so that my contribution is. So in other words, nobody knows really what his kavanah is.
I guess that the point is that we don't. He says since his main kavanah obviously is just to bring the offering, it's considered secondary.
Otherwise it would be unusual.
So that the reason, right? That's not his primary thing. And my primary goal is that the leftovers of the korban are going to go into the upkeep of the house. Doesn't make any sense, right? So too with the erech, he's giving the money, thinking I'm giving this money as an offering,
right.
Not because I want it to be in the upkeep of the house. Oh, I'm going to build something with it. They're going to build something, or they're going to put a chandelier. He doesn't know what you're going to do with it. He just knows that he's giving money, and maybe it's going to be korbanot, or it's going to be whatever. So it goes into the fund for Bedek Habayit. Now, but that's not his kavanah. His kavanah is just to give the money, not for a specific result. So this is kind of like speaking to your point before, how indirect or direct does it have to be. So that's what it's talking about here. So there's a correction on the side of the Girsa. What is the correction on the side here? That it should say. Oh, that should be gone. It should just say Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish patarla. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish will say that it comes from Lo lachem velanu livnot bayit Elohenu. That Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish is learning from the pasuk of it's not for you and for us to build the house to our God. In other words, what is the problem? The problem is the building of the house. In other words, according to Rabbi Yochanan, we understand it's not a problem. That the leftover money that from the nisachim that are contributed go into the bedek habayit, go into the upkeep of the house, but they don't go to a davar misuyam. They don't go to a specific thing. Or same thing with the arachim that are given. When a person gives an erech, it doesn't go to a specific thing. It goes into the general fund for the upkeep of the house. And so it's not really that the non-Jew doesn't have a specific kavanah in mind. Okay. But according to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, it's still a problem because he says that even if it goes into the general upkeep, it's a problem. And we know that those arachim are going into the bedek habayit. They're definitely going for the general upkeep. So his answer is, it's only the bayit that's a problem. Only the structure is a problem. But to purchase klei sharet, the fact that the extra libation is going to be sold, and now you're going to purchase new bowls with it. You're going to purchase new forks with it. That's okay according to Reish Lakish. It's only the bayit itself that you can't use the non-Jewish money to purchase. You can use the non-Jewish money to purchase the kelim. That's the compromise that he finds. So therefore, yes, he would have a problem if it went into the general fund. If it went into the fund that contributed to the structure, he would have a problem with it. But since it doesn't go into that, it only goes into purchasing kelim. It only goes into purchasing klei sharet. He says it's okay. Rabbi Chizkiah Rabbi Simon Sha'al. Rabbi Chizkiah said that Rabbi Simon asked, "Me'ata in mekabalin mehen la'amat hamayim l'chomot ha'ir u'migdalotah." We also shouldn't receive money from non-Jews for the amat hamayim, for the waterway, and for the walls of the city, and for the towers of the city. Al Shem, as it says, v'lachem in chelek, because in the next pasuk it says, you don't have any portion in the city of Jerusalem. They also said to the Shomronim, to the Kutim. They said, so that means that not only the house of the Beit HaMikdash itself, but any structure in Jerusalem, we shouldn't take the money from them, according to this. Okay? Now we skip the parentheses and we go to where it says Matnita de Rabbi Meir. It really should have said Mai Ta'amad de Rabbi Meir. What is the reasoning of Rabbi Meir? Da'amar Rabbi Meir kishem sheklo Torah. Just like the shekel, the machatzit shekel is from the Torah, kach kalbonot Torah. That giving the kalbon is also Torah. It's also a biblical obligation. Kasavar Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir says benoten sheklo shalem shu chayav bekolbon. That even when Rabbi Meir would say, even if you give the coin and you don't require any money changing, you still have to give the kolbon. The Amar Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir says, "Kamid bad be'ah shel esh hotzi HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitachat kizei kvodo ve'ra'u leMoshe va'amar lo ze yitenu kazeh yitenu." Because he says, Rabbi Meir says that Hashem showed Moshe Rabbeinu a fiery coin coming from underneath the throne of glory. He showed it to Moshe and he said, Zeh yitenu, this is exactly the what you should give. Meaning, it has to be exactly like this. That's in Kitisa. Zeh yitenu kol ha'over al pikudim. Machatzit shekel v'shekel hakodesh. This is Kitisa. So he gives him, he showed him an exact vision of what it had to be. So Rabbi Meir says, even if you give machatzit shekel, you didn't ask for any money changing. You didn't have to break the coin. Still, Rabbi Meir would say, you have to give the kolbon to make sure that you're meeting the exact specification, and that's min Torah, that you have to supplement it with extra. It's not only when you have to break the money that you have to do that. Okay? Now it says Natan sela litol shekel hayav shnei kolbonot. It said if you give a sela and you take change of a shekel, then you have to give 2 kolbanot. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Elazar says to Rabbi Meir, this is obviously Rabbi Meir. The Tanya, we skip the parentheses, the Tanya, it says, Elu chayvin kolbon, kulei kolbon echad, Rabbi Meir Amar, bet kolbanot. Rabbi Meir said 2 kolbanot. Why 2 kolbanot? Why do you have to give 2? 1, because you gave machatzita shekel from money that was broken. I mean, one is because you gave machatzita shekel, and according to Rabbi Meir, you always have to supplement it. And 2, because you broke change. Okay? That's what he would say. 2. However, Umar Rav, it should say Virav Amar, actually. Rav says, Divrei Kolhi. Everybody agrees that when you give a complete shekel and you take a machatzita shekel change, that you have to give 2 kolbanot. Okay? Everybody agrees in that. Because there's actually 2 transactions going on. One is that you gave a full shekel and you need to break money to give the money to the Beit HaMikdash, but you're also getting the service of getting the change back. So everybody agrees in that case because it's bi-directional. In other words, according to the Chachamim, if you give a full shekel for 2 people, you only have to pay 1 surcharge because they're breaking it in 2. But if you give a full shekel and you want your money back, to return your money, that's another charge. I have to return money now. Right, so I'm going to charge you twice. 1 for breaking it to give to the Beit HaMikdash and 1 for returning it. Okay, so if that's according to Rav. Now, but then, according to the Chachamim, because according to Rabbi Meir, al datet Rav, gimel kolbonot inun. According to Rav's interpretation of Rabbi Meir is that in this case you'd have to give 3 kolbonot. In other words, the Chachamim will say 1 is for breaking the money and giving the shekel to the Beit HaMikdash. 1 is the surcharge to return your change. 2 kolbanot. Rabbi Meir would say, I agree with both of those. You need a surcharge to break the money, you need a surcharge to get the money back, and you have to supplement with a little extra. Anyway, because even when you give a regular machatzita shekel, you have to supplement according to Rabbi Meir. So therefore, there's going to be 3 kolbanot according to Rabbi Meir. So the point is, if you're giving a sela, if you're giving a full shekel, better to partner with somebody. Then each of you just have to give 1 kolban. Otherwise, if you ask for change, you're going to have to pay the extra surcharge even to get the change back.
Pretty active money lenders, huh?
Yeah, they were,
No wonder they got into trouble.
Mm-hmm. Now we see where we get the reputation. So it said that when the brothers who are partners are obligated in the kolbon, they are exempt from maaser behema b'shechalku v'chazru v'nishtatfu, as I explained before. When they have the estate, it's still intact, and they break it apart and they reconstitute it. So now they're considered to be partners anew, right? They're new partners. It's not the original estate. As it's not the original estate, there are 2 implications. When they pay their machatzita shekel, they're paying it from their own pocket now, not from dad's pocket anymore. However, but the animals are jointly owned. They're not owned by one estate. They're jointly owned, which is actually a leniency. In other words, what you have to understand is that what's a leniency for Maaser Behema is the stringency for Kolbon. Because for Maaser Behema, being partners is a leniency. For Kolbon, being partners is a stringency because it means each person is on their own. When it comes to Kolbon, having it be one estate is actually better because that means the estate's paying for you and it's a gift, so therefore it doesn't have to pay Kolbon. But that would mean that the Behemot are owned by one entity, by the estate, and are required to have Maaser taken. So that's why it works like that. Okay? So it's logical. So then, and when they didn't split up the estate, so therefore, when it comes to kolbon, they're paying from the estate for their machatzita shekel, they're paying 1 selah, so they don't have to pay a surcharge because it's like a gift that their dad is giving them. But the behemot have to have maaser taken because they're owned by one owner, which is the estate. Okay? Amar Rabbi Lazar said, this is only true if what they did was they split it, goats for sheep and sheep for goats. Meaning to say, you said I'll take 10 goats, you take 10 sheep. Right? In other words, we didn't split it and say, I'll take half the sheep, you take half the sheep, I'll take half the goats, you take half the goats. We instead bartered. I said, you know what? I want goats You want sheep. You take the sheep, just make sure that you take a value that's, fair value. I'll take the goats and other stuff, and we'll have an equal value in the end. So what does that really mean? When you split up like that with equal value, so in other words, according to Rabbi Elazar, or Rabbi Lazar as he's called in Yerushalmi, if we split it up, okay, there are sheep and goats. You take half the sheep, I take half the sheep, you take half the goats, I take half the goats, and then we reconstitute, it's like we never left. Why? Because we never really made an exchange. We could say this was the original portion that fell to me from the estate. Okay, we never made any change. So if we reconstitute, it's like we never left. However, if we bartered in the process, I took 10 goats for your 5 sheep. You took 10 sheep for my 5 goats, whatever it is. I actually bought you out of the estate. We traded. We made a trade. So we completely separated from the original estate. We don't look at it as, you got half, I got half of each thing. Because then the estate isn't really dissolved yet. And if we recombine, we could say we're reconstituting the original.
Then they're not considered.
Let's say there's 100 sheep and 100 goats.
Okay.
We're brothers.
Right.
Dad dies, 100 sheep, 100 goats. I say, all right, I'm going to take 50 sheep, you take 50 sheep, I'll take 50 goats, you take 50 goats.
Okay.
A couple weeks later, I say, you know what, let's just be partners, because, it doesn't make any sense that we should be separate.
Okay.
So, according to Rabbi Lazar, that means we're staying, that we never dissolved the estate, really.
So
because because we didn't do anything, nothing changed.
I take my thing and I'll go a separate way.
Right.
Versus...
We recombined. But if I said to you, I'll take the 100 goats, you take the 100 sheep. And the value works out. The value will work out. I'm buying you out of your chelek of the sheep, and through my goats. I'm paying you with sheep for my part of the goats. You're paying me with goats for my part of the sheep. Whatever it is. In other words, we're working it out in a way that we're trading off, because I want sheep and you want goats.
Oh, in other words, one ends up with...
So the goats that I gave you. So in other words, the fact that you're getting all 100 goats is because I wanted, really you should have 50 of the sheep and 50 of the goats. I should have 50 of the sheep and 50 of the goats. But instead, I'm trading you the 50 goats I could have had for the other 50 sheep, because I really want sheep. You're trading me the 50 sheep that you could have had for the 50 goats, because you wanted goats. In other words, we split it not evenly. We didn't split it evenly.
So anytime you split...
When you split it evenly...
That big makes it...
When it's not even, so it's like a purchase. I bought you out of your portion, and you bought me out of my portion. And so now we dissolve the estate. So even if we recombine, it's a new entity. It's new. It's a new partnership. It's not the original estate.
And the implication of that is that when it's...
The implication is that if it's not...
Maser?
Now we don't have to do maser, but we do have to pay kolbon.
Oh, I see.
Right?
Because it's like it was when...
Because it's like we completely split up. It's like we completely split up and 2 new people made a partnership. Whereas if we split it down the middle, I took 50 sheep, 50 goats, you took 50 sheep, 50 goats, and then we reconstituted, it's like we never left. It's like the original estate never was broken up. Because that's what I automatically would have gotten anyway.
Then there's no maser.
Then there's no maser, because it's... then there is maser, because it's considered one estate still. One estate pays maser. One estate doesn't pay kolbon, right? So now, Amar Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. Afilu chalaku gedayim neged gedayim uteishim neged teishim kilekochoten upturin min ha'maser. Ki hahu detanenan taman halakoach v'shenitan lo b'matana, or halakoach v'shenitan lo b'matana patur mi'maser behema. He says no, even if they actually split it down the middle. In other words, it was 50 sheep and 50 goats on one side, 50 sheep and 50 goats on the other side. When they recombine, it's a new partnership. Once that estate is divided, they can never reconstitute it. So according to Rabbi Lazar, there's always the potential, as long as everything has been done even Steven, with no exchange. I got 50% of each thing, you got 50% of each thing. Then we could actually reconstitute our father's original estate, and it would be like it was never divided. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, no matter what you do, once you assign, okay, you got 50 sheep, 50 goats, I got 50 sheep, 50 goats, you can never come back to it being undivided. Even if we pool our resources again, it's a new partnership. We'll never be able to be like it once was. and therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan, we can never regain the position where we won't have to pay the kolban. But we will be able to avoid maaser because we're going to become partners in all the animals. And I would think probably financially that is the greater benefit, obviously, because maaser you're losing 1/10 of your animals to become a korban, whereas kolban is worth a few pennies. So it's not worth, it's probably a few pennies once a year. So obviously financially it's more lucrative to be partners in that case than to keep the estate intact.